Are you ready to sew this fantastic horse hooded towel? Me too. I'm Jessi from Bell by Jessi, and this is one of my own creations, and I would love to sew it with you. All you need to do is go to bellbyjessi.com to download your pattern. That's Bell by Jessi. There's an extra E on the Bell, not on the Jessi. bellbyjessi.com. Download my original pattern, get yourself a towel, a hand towel to match, a little bit of bias tape to match, and some felt pieces to make the horse's mane, ears, and eyes. Meet me back here and let's sew this together. All right, I have downloaded my pattern. I've gathered all my materials and I'm ready to start working. So first thing, I'm going to set my sewing instructions off to the side, and now I'm ready to trim out my pattern pieces with my paper scissors. And our hood is a little too big to fit on one piece of paper, so you'll see that it is split into two pieces of paper. You have your instructions here to use these dotted lines. Cut these pieces out, use the dotted lines to tape them together. A little trick I like to do is leave that white section on one side so that I'm not trying to tape two cut pieces together. So let's do that now. All right, let me put my glasses on so I get this lined up. All right, so we're just gonna line up these dotted lines, tape it together, and then we'll have our full hood. All right, the rest of our pieces are out of felt, but this hood we're going to cut out of the hand towels. So let's go ahead and do that now. We have instructions on here for our hand towel as well. So my hand towel has on one side this little kind of stripe design in the towel. I don't have it on the other side. I don't want that in my hood. You may not care, but I don't want that in my hood. So what I'm gonna do is fold it. Instead of from end to end, I'm gonna fold it from one end over to that little stripe. And I should be able to squeeze my hood out of there. Oh yeah, that's just gonna fit in there. So on your pattern piece, you have marked the fold. So here's the fold of my towel, and then fold hand towel in half, place this edge along the finished edge of the hand towel. Do not cut this edge. So we don't wanna put it up here and cut. That will be another raw edge we'll have to deal with. So what we wanna do is slide this down here. Just line it up the best you can. I know sometimes it doesn't lay exactly perpendicular on that finished towel, but that's okay. We want to use this nice finished edge. That's one less thing we have to sew. So I'm going to get it lined up in that corner, and I'm going to cut this edge and this curved edge. Now you can pin it like normal. That's probably what you're used to doing at home. Something we do in sample rooms and in the factory is use a weight instead of pins to hold the pattern down. You can buy a pattern weight, or anything heavy will work. Your tape dispenser might be heavy enough to hold it in place, or a small book. I like to use these old irons. They've got a handle, they're nice and heavy. The only thing you have to watch out for is make sure that you get one that's nice and smooth on the bottom so that it doesn't snag your fabric or rip your pattern piece. All right, so I've got that on there. Let's go ahead and trim this hood out. All right, there's my hood. I also need my snout out of this piece. This is where I should have already trimmed that out. All right, let's trim our snout piece out real quick so we can do that while our terry's in the middle of our table. Let me put my glasses on, make sure I trim it good. All right, so look, even when you do this for a living, sometimes you get yourself out of order. All right, now I'm ready to cut my other terry piece. So my hand towel has plenty of space left to cut my horse snout. I did not put a grain line on this for you because this is terry cloth. It's not a woven fabric. I would suggest, rather than putting it on the 45, that you go either parallel to the side of the towel or perpendicular to it. Either way, shouldn't matter. So if your hand towel is slightly different size than mine, doesn't really matter whether you put it this way or this way, but we do want it parallel or perpendicular. So my pattern weight's a little bit too big for this piece, so I can pin it down or I can just hold it with my fingers. I know that stresses some of y'all out, so I'll pin it down this time. And we need 2 of these. Not on the fold, just 2 pieces. All right, there we go. All right, let's get these terry scraps out of the way. You can see why we don't want to have any extra raw edges on this terry. It starts raveling as soon as you cut it, but that's okay. We're going to cover all those raw edges. All right, so let's move these pieces to the side. And now all we've got to do is trim out the rest of our pattern pieces and cut them out of felt. So all of these we will trim out with our paper scissors, and then we'll get them cut out of felt. All right, so I've got my 2 ear pieces, my 2 eye pieces here. I'm not making a unicorn. I'm making just a horse right now, so I don't need my unicorn horn. Our nostril, I know, is this small round piece. Don't worry, it's the same size as a dime, so I can just trace my dime and not have to worry about cutting that little circle. And then last one is my horse mane. So if you wanted to give your horse like a multicolored or rainbow type mane, I've got some little lines here where you can split it apart. I don't want to do that. My horse is going to have one long brown mane. I'm going to have a tan horse with a brown mane. So I'm leaving this as one pattern piece. I don't need to worry about those little split lines, so I'm just going to totally ignore them. All right, let's get our felt pieces out. So, I'm gonna do my mane first. Let's get these little pieces, scoot it over. All right, I just need one piece of brown felt. Oh yeah, it's gonna fit in there. All right, so I like to do as little cutting as possible if I can. Cut steps, that saves me a little bit of time. So I've got a straight edge on my mane on both sides. Actually, all the sides are straight edges. I've got a straight edge on my piece of felt here. So I'm going to line up my straight edges together. Oh, and I just fit in there. So I didn't have to get a new piece of felt. That's perfect. I'm going to see, yes, I can put my pattern weight on here and hold it and give myself space to cut around it. Let's trim that out. Perfect. All right, so my horse nostril, you can do it in the black if you like that better. I'm going to make mine out of the brown. Oh, and this little scrap looks like I'm going to have a big enough piece of it. So what I'm going to do is get my pencil. And I know this will be hard to see on the video, but I'm going to just make a circle on the felt with my pencil. Yeah, so I don't know if you can see that, but I've got a nice smooth circle just drawn on there. I need 2, so I'm going to do another one. And then I can just cut on my drawing line there instead of trying to cut around a pattern piece. There we go. So I don't know if you can see that, but I've got 2 circles right there. I can cut out for my horse nostrils. All right, so on my ear, I'm going to do the body of the ear to match my towel. Let's see if you can see all this. So my towel is tan, and I have this tan felt. It's not a perfect match, but it's pretty darn close. So don't worry if yours is not exact. We just want it to be close enough. So that's for the body of the ear. The ear is going to be 2-ply. This little flap will make sense when we're sewing. We're going to have a front and a back, so a 2-ply ear. Actually, I'll go ahead and show you real quick. So it's going to kind of loosely fold that. So what we're going to end up doing when we're sewing is that flap is what's going to help the ear stand up. So you don't need to cut anything differently. I just wanted to show you on the pattern piece how that was going to be. So I'm going to need 4 of these. And a little trick I like to do for these small pattern pieces, similar to what I did with the coin, but I'm going to use a paper towel. So I'm going to put my pattern piece on the paper towel, and I'm going to trace around it just with a pencil. Let me do that real quick. So I like to make a paper towel pattern piece. Now, a paper towel's got a little texture to it, so it's not going to slide around, but I also don't have to pin it when I need multiple of a little small piece. This is a trick that I like to use that makes it a lot easier to cut it out as precisely as I can. We can never cut things perfectly. So that's not anything to ever stress yourself about. But we do want to cut it as close to the shape as we can, and this just makes it a little bit easier. All right, there we go. So I got my ear pattern piece now. When I put it on my felt, it's not going to slide around. It kind of sticks to it, so I don't have to pin it, but it's not as stiff as the paper. I just love using this little trick. All right, but I am still going to fold my felt in half and try to cut 2 at a time. Same thing. I've got a flat edge here and a flat edge on my felt, so I'm going to put that right on the flat edge. So that's 1 less side I need to cut. All right, so I do need to make sure that my 2 layers of felt don't move around. There we go. All right, let's trim that out. There we got 1 ear, and we need 1 more. All right, let's get our pink. This is going to be the interior, the inside of our ear. So I only need 2 of this. Even though it is a little small piece, I'll just pin this one to cut it. All right, so I'm going to fold over my edge here. See if I can get that to fit. Oh yeah, and lined up on that flat side. Let me put a pin in this one. There we go. So there's our little horse ears. All right, I just have a very small piece of black felt. All I need it for is my pupil, so that was plenty enough. I didn't need to go buy another one. For the white part of my eye, obviously I've got some white here. All right, let's see if we can do this same way. We're going to fold it over. I'm going to use that flat edge, and I will pin this little piece since I only need 2. Like, I'm going to show you all this. I cut a little funny piece right there. Can you see that? Oh, never mind, it just came off. There it is on the back, so it's not totally smooth right there. So why I love felt, it doesn't ravel. So if you get a little spot like that, just shave it off with your scissors. It may not be perfect, that's okay. I bet if you go look at a horse in a face, his face isn't exactly perfect either. All right, there we go. All right, so here are my eyes. Now I will say this, because it is basically impossible to cut things perfectly. When I open them up to sew, instead of going like this, so they're both facing the same way, I like to open it like a sandwich so that I have a mirror image of each other. So then where I had to shave it off a little bit, it's not exactly perfect. That's okay. Mirrored looks better than having the exact same thing copied and pasted beside each other. All right, let's cut our little pupils out, and we'll lay our face out and take a look at how cute it's going to be. This piece is so tiny, y'all. I'm just going to hold it in my hands. I'm not even going to put a pin in it. So I'm just pinching it between my thumb and my finger and cutting around it. Gonna open it like a sandwich again. All right, there's gonna be his mane. Let's find his snout again. Oh man, I knocked off. Well, I knocked off one of my nostrils, but here we go. I'll put my dome here so you can see. All right, I'll cut that one again momentarily, but here's what our horse is going to look like. It's going to be so cute. All right, let's gather all these pieces, our towel and our bias tape. Let's head down to the sewing machine and put this together. All right, the first thing we're going to do is sew our little nostrils onto our horse snout. So generally, Terry doesn't really have a right or a wrong side, but if you feel like one side of yours looks better than the other, then choose your right side. And we're going to put our little circles on there for our little horse nostrils on the snout. Now remember, you're going to take about a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around here, so don't get too close to that. And kind of place them really wherever looks good for you, and we're just going to stitch in a circle to hold those on there as close to the edge as you can. It's so small, I'm not going to pin it. If you want to try, feel free, but I think I can just hold it with my fingers, and I'm going to stitch around. I'm going to back stitch once I get all the way around the circle. You can use your hand wheel to help you go around this little small circle. Let's get the other one placed. That looks good to me. All right, so this is now the right side of our snout. Get your other piece. If it has a right or wrong to you, put the right sides together. We're going to leave this straight edge open so that we can turn it, and we're going to stitch around the curved sides at about a 1/2 inch. So I'll put a couple pins in here. I don't always pin stuff. I sew like a production worker, as quick as possible. But I'll put a couple pins in there so it doesn't slide around. So we want to back stitch at each end, and again at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. All right, before we turn it right side out, you can clip the corners or the curves. I'm actually going to trim them a little bit closer to my seam. That's essentially the same thing. Both things just keep us from having too much bulk on the inside of those curves. So I'm going to trim it like that. And then we're going to fold it, or sorry, turn it right side out. There we go. So cute. It's already so cute. All right, momentarily we're going to cover this raw edge with some bias tape, but let's get our other towel pieces ready as well, and we'll do all that bias tape at one time. So I'm going to move my little face out of the way and get the hood. Okay, so our main is one piece right now. In a little bit, we're gonna trim it to make it look like hair. But this shorter side, not the real narrow side on the top and bottom, but the shorter side goes into the hood, and then the longer side is going to be the hair that sticks out. So we're gonna open up our hood. We're gonna put this shorter side in there up as close as you can get it to where the hood fold is. We're going to close this back up. Now we're sewing a straight piece into a curve. So what you're going to do is stitch a little bit and then just kind of use your fingers to sort of curve this around as you sew. We're going to sew this also at about 1/2 inch. That's the seam allowance I normally use. Again, my background is in production pattern making, so I do things sometimes a little bit differently. If you like to sew it a slightly bigger seam allowance than that, it's really not going to make that much of a difference for this project. All right, but we're going to back stitch here. Make sure we get that main in there. We're going to back stitch at this bottom edge too. And now, all right, we can take a look real quick at our main. So it's just a block right now. And in a little bit, we'll trim that to turn it into a horse's mane that looks more like hair. All right, but before we do any more of that, this towel is all over the place. We're gonna get our bias tape and we're gonna cover all these terry cloth edges. All right, so on our bias tape, and you just want something that's close to the color. You can see mine doesn't match exactly, that's fine. We want something that's just close to the color. What we're going to do is sew it around our seam, so it's going to cover all those raw edges just like that. And sometimes on bias tape, you'll see that one side is a little bit longer than the other side. So if yours is like that, sometimes they get it lined up exactly right, but if yours is like that, you want that longer side on the bottom to help ensure that when you're stitching from the top that you're catching that bottom part. So I'm going to flip this over so that I'm starting on the edge that's all the way up to the cut edge, and I'm ending on the folded edge here. All right, and to start on this seam, we don't need to do anything to it but line up. So I've got the longer side, it's going to be on the bottom. I'm going to wrap it around so that that terry cloth is encased inside of this bias tape. So I don't have any raw edges that are going to ravel while this is being worn and enjoyed. So you can pin this all the way around. I'm not going to. I'm just going to use my fingers and hold it on there while I'm sewing. So I'm going to go ahead and put it under the machine and get sewing. I am going to back stitch here. I'm going to check, make sure, yep, I'm catching that plenty. All right, as we get close to our fold here, we're going to cut our bias tape. We want to give ourselves a little bit extra to fold under. Excuse me. All right, so we've got a little bit extra here. And what we want to do is fold that inside of itself so that we don't have any raw edges of our bias tape either. Now, it does not need to be all the way up against the edge of your seam, but you don't want it too long either, because this is actually the face part, the front part of your towel. So I'm going to fold mine up and see if I can get it sort of close to that terry cloth seam that I'm covering. But basically the important part is that all the raw edges are encased inside of there, so we don't have any worries about raveling. All right, now we're going to stitch all the way to the end of that bias tape and back stitch there. So there we go, I caught it on the other side. So our main is in there nice and secure with no loose raw edges. But we do have a raw edge down here along the neckline, so that's our next thing. We're going to cover that with bias tape also, and then we're going to do our snout. So on this one, we do want to do that fold with our bias tape on both sides so that we don't end up with any of those raw edges. So at the beginning and the end of this seam, I'm going to fold my bias tape inside of itself. Just 1/4 of an inch or so is fine, and fold like so, so that everything is nice, folded, clean finished edges. So I've got it folded down. Now I'm going to wrap it around that raw edge. I'm going to back stitch here and take it all the way across the bottom of this hood. When you're stitching over your other bias tape, it might be a little bit thick. If your machine doesn't want to go over that little thick section, you can use your hand wheel to help it over. So if you need to use your hand wheel to go over this thicker part, that's totally fine. But we do want to keep going all the way to the other end. Alright, when I get to the opposite end, I want to trim it again. I'm going to give myself just a little bit to turn under, because I do want to try to line it up as close as I can to the end of that terry cloth. I'm going to sandwich that terry cloth inside there so that all the raw edges are covered. It's nice and clean finished. Stitch all the way to the end and back stitch. Beautiful. So you'll see my stitching on the bottom is not as pretty, not as close to the edge. That's fine. All we're worried about for that bias tape is that it's going to hold everything in so we don't have any of that raveling. All right, we got one more to do. On our snout here, same thing. We're going to get a little piece of bias tape. We're going to fold the end under and cover this edge as well. So just like on the bottom of our hood, we're going to start with that bias tape folded in on itself just so that we don't have a raw edge of it either. This is going to be a little bit thicker when you're going over these end seams, so if you need to use your hand wheel, that's totally fine. We're going to sandwich it in there just like so, so that everything's covered. Stitch it across, same thing at the opposite end. And again, you can pin this. You do not need to hold it with your fingers. This is just the way that I sew. Alright, I'm going to give myself a little bit on this end to turn under. Alright, I've got that bias tape folded and wrapped around the terry. I'm going to finish stitching to the end and back stitch. Beautiful. Now our snout piece is all finished. It's ready to put onto the hood. Alright, so you want to find the center. And find the center of this also. Actually, I'm going to go this way. So we can put our two centers together. Pinch them there. Then put your fingers on the inside. Open it up. And now I've got my centers aligned. Let me flip this up real quick. So I have my right side of my snout to the right side, the face part of my hood. So I am going to pin this so it doesn't slide on me. But I'm going to stitch that snout onto the hood. Alright, so I'm going to back stitch at both ends, and I want to stitch on the inside, so just past the bias tape so that the bias tape isn't going to show, it's going to get caught in the hood. So I want to stitch on this side, which is about 1/2 inch again. I'm going to back stitch at both ends. So we're starting to get that horse shape. All right, before we put the rest of our face on here, we want to hem this front of our hood so that it's nice and finished, and then everything else can go on after that. So we're going to turn it to the inside of our hood, and we're going to fold, remember this nice beautiful edge that was already on our towel. We don't have to do anything to it. It's not going to ravel. It's already factory finished. We're just going to fold that in to create a hem so that on the outside all we see is terry. So we're going to stitch, back stitch at each end, and stitch all the way across just to create a hem. If you need to use your hand wheel to help you get over some of these thicker parts, that's totally fine. All right, beautiful. Our hood is actually done. Now we just need to add the rest of our horse facial features. We can go ahead at this point too and trim our mane. So it's one solid piece, and all we're gonna do is cut some slits in here. I'm gonna make them about 3/4 of an inch or so wide. We're gonna cut some slits in here to make it look like hair. I'm not gonna cut all the way to my stitching, and I'm not gonna worry about them all being even. I just want to cut some so that it has a little bit of movement and looks a little bit more like the horse's mane. There we go. So now our horse has a little bit more of that fluffy mane. All right, let's get our eyes made. So on my eyes, pretty self-explanatory. I've got the white part for the back, the black part for the center. You can float the eyes. There's lots of ways to do this. I like them lined up at the bottom, and I actually like them a little bit closer at the center. Feel like that just has a little bit more of that cute cartoon look. So you can pin this if you want to. I'm going to trust my felt to stay put. I am going to switch to black thread real quick to sew the black part on. All right, we're going to edge stitch all the way around the black, as close to the edge as we can. All right, I'm going to switch back to my beige thread to attach the eyes. Okay, you do have a marking on your hood pattern piece. However, I always like to use just my own eyeballs to put the face pieces on what I have actually sewn. It's impossible to sew perfectly, so things are not always going to be exactly straight or centered. So I like to just look in real life at what I've actually sewn and put the pieces together that way. So I'm going to pin my eyes on and take a minute to check them and see if they look right before I sew them on. Well, looky there. I'm pretty happy with that on the first try. So I like the way that mine are pinned on there. I'm going to edge stitch now. I'm not worried about switching to white. I have beige colored thread, which will blend in good enough. But just like we did on the black part, on the white part, now attaching it to the towel, but we're going to edge stitch all the way around the white part as close to the edge as we can on both eyes. All right, let's get our ears made. So I'm going to take one ear piece, one body ear, and one inner ear. Now remember, we had the bottom part of this was going to be a flap to help it stand up. So it's going to go, I can hold it for you like that. So the pink does not need to go all the way to the bottom. So you're going to kind of put it where it's in the center of the top portion of the ear for each one of them. And we're going to stitch all the way around that pink part first. So that pink part goes onto just one layer of the body. All right, now for each of these ears, I'm going to take the other body piece and I'm going to put them together for a 2-ply ear, but we do not want to sew that bottom part where the flap is going to be open. So we want that to still be able to open. So I'm going to start about a 1/2 inch up all around the top and stop on the other side so that that bottom flap can still be open. I am going to back stitch here, right where the edge of that flap is. I just realized I forgot to point this out at the beginning of the machine, at the beginning of the video, but I am sewing on an industrial machine, which is slightly different from your home machines. One of the main things being that I can control the presser foot with my knee. So if you're wondering how I'm going around those corners a little, or those curves a little easier than you can at home, is because while I do have a lever back here to lift the presser foot just like you do at home, I also have a lever down here I can control it with my knee. So I just forgot to point that out at the beginning. I have a funny little bump right here, so felt doesn't ravel, so I like to use it. I'm just going to trim that a little bit with my scissors. Trim up this side right here. There, and now it looks like I lined them up exactly perfect. All right, let's sew that other ear together to make it 2-ply as well. Same thing. All right, now that I've got my cute little ears, I'm ready to put them on my horse. Same thing as before, you do have a little mark on your hood pattern piece, but I like to put it on the actual thing that I've sewn. And all you're going to do is finger press these 2 flaps open so that they make little legs so that it can stand up, and these flaps are what we're going to stitch onto the hood. So let's see, do my ears look like they get, well, I like them that way. All right, so I'm going to put this one on this side. So I'm going to finger press this open to make my little flaps stand out like some little feet. And I'm going to pin these. I'm going to eyeball pin them and then adjust them if I need to before I sew them on. And they are going to go back up into sort of the hairline of your horse a little bit so that that mane can kind of flop in front of the ears like a real horse. All right, so I feel like I've got those fairly well spaced. What we're going to do now is stitch kind of where I have it pinned there, but we're going to stitch across here as close to the pink as we can get. We won't be able to get it all the way up against it, but as close to the pink as we can. Then we're going to go across the side and then also stitch across the front, or you don't have to do the side, but we want to stitch up close to the center of the ear and also on the edge of that flap. We're going to do that on the front and on the back of both ears. There's our cute little horse. All right, last thing, we need to attach our hood to our towel. So pull out your body towel and we want to fold it in half and find the center. Let's see if I can get this in the shot where you can see it. So we're going to fold it in half, find the center, and just pinch that, hold it there. Get your hood, and this is easy because our seam is in the center. So you're going to fold your hood right where that seam is. Line those two folds up together, those two centers up together. So we have our right side of our hood with our towel, and then we're going to open it, pinch the inside part, pinch those two pieces together, and you can open the whole hood. And that's just an easy way to get it centered up without having to measure. I'm going to pin this so my center doesn't slip, so I've got it still lined up with the center. And now all we've got to do is stitch the hood to the body towel. So we're going to stitch on the inside part of that bias tape so our bias tape doesn't show. And I am actually going to back stitch and then back stitch again on both ends, because this is a stress point when someone's wearing this. That does get a lot of stress, so I'm going to triple stitch on both ends to make sure it's nice and secure. I had so much fun sewing this horse hooded towel with you. I hope you enjoyed it too. If you're not already, please subscribe so you don't miss any of the DIY projects, sewing tips, and all around fun in the sewing studio. I look forward to sewing with you again soon.
And also like and subscribe. Yeah, so like and subscribe.
Thanks, boys. Oh, I found it. Stuck on my paper towel. There we go.